As the 2023 college football offseason continues to roll on, Utah continues to bring in some top recruits for visits, and they even named one player's top three schools. What does it all mean? We're talking about it on today's Locked On Utes.
You are Locked On Utes, your daily podcast on the Utah Utes. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for making Locked On Utes your first listen every single day. We're available on all platforms, including YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts. My name is JT Wistow, former intern inside the University of Utah Athletic Department, and today's episode is brought to you by Bird Dogs. You guys can head over to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege, and they'll throw in a free custom Bird Dogs Yeti style tumbler with every order. So once again, go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege to get in that great offer from our friends at Bird Dogs. And we'll hear a little bit more about them later on in our episode. On today's show, we're going to be talking a lot of things recruiting. And in order to help me do that, it's Ute Zone's Dante Guardi. And Dante, starting out first with a linebacker who named Utah to his top three, Kylan Reed. Reed is a 2024 three-star outside linebacker, 6'2", 215 overall. Named Utah to his top three, along with Baylor and Oklahoma State overall. When you talk about Reed, this is a guy who's got quickness off the snap, uses his hands well, really good bend, really explosive athlete to me. The guy can rush from a 7 and a 9 technique, but could rush head up as well. Get after it outside the tackles, as I mentioned, head up to physical on first contact, a physical run defender too. Just a good job meeting pullers, blowing up plays in the backfield. Really good speed, energy, and just the motor setting the edge. Loves to chase down backs from behind. I'm a huge fan of Reed and his athleticism, and I think he'd be a really good get for this team.
Yeah, his first step was what jumped off the tape when I came in and watched. So obviously that's the number one thing. Very good off the edge, can beat tackles one-on-one, and he uses that quick first step, that great speed of his to get around and win on the outside. Quality short area quickness as well makes him a disruptor behind the line of scrimmage against both the pass and the run. You'll be able to see him stop on a dime, chop his feet real quick, and go down and make a clutch tackle. Very slippery off the edge as well. That was another thing. It was very rare where you see an offensive lineman really get a firm grip on him and move him around. Very good handwork, strong upper body as well, so can get off those blocks and make an impact against the run. The only thing that's a little bit concerning is that he only weighs 210, and a lot of his film was off the edge. So, I mean, obviously going to translate to more of a linebacker. You're not going to be 210 pounds running off the edge at the Power 5 level. But, I mean, overall, in terms of his intangibles, the speed really sticks out. And overall, the assignment soundness of his game, not a lot of mistakes in there. Very, very meticulous, very fundamental in his approach, which is obviously a great thing to see, making that transition to the Power 5 college level.
And I think another thing that I really just excites me about Reed is this is a Utah 2024 class that doesn't have really any linebackers right now. You got a safety, Angelo Davis, a couple defensive linemen, and of course the cream of the crop, Isaac Wilson. In fact, the 2024 recruiting class at the moment, Dante, you want to guess where it ranks with just those four players in it?
Sheesh. I mean, a lot of these rankings are purely based off of the amount of players you have, not necessarily like the stars. So got to be what, like 55-ish?
70.
Yeah.
It's that far back. And that's just because of the amount they have. I mean, I think there was another school, I'm blanking on it now, but there was another really notable school. It's really far down these rankings.
It is every year.
So much
it always starts a little bit slow, and then it runs its course.
And we saw how it changed last year for Utah, especially late after that Pac-12 championship run for them after beating USC. So that just go to show you how fluid this stuff can be and how much it can change over time. But as I mentioned with Reed, just add an explosive linebacker. When you're talking about the future of the linebacker position at Utah, and we'll get into this more later. Like, obviously, Lander Barton is a guy I'm really excited on for these next 2 years. I really think there's a good chance he's only a 3-year guy. I think he's that special. I think he's capable of having that kind of season. Could he be here for 4? Absolutely. I just think he's the kind of player who's only might be here for 3 years because he's that good. Kylan Reed, only got really 2 seasons left with this Utah program overall. So we'll see what he ends up deciding to do even after this season, how that goes. Leavani Demouni kind of on his last run with Utah this year. Obviously, Justin Medlock is a guy we're going to be extremely high on, and especially looking next year, I'm really excited to see the Lander Barton Medlock tandem kind of unleashed. And as a recruit, there's a couple of exciting guys in there. You get a Makai Halu, who's going to serve his mission before coming back over. But I do feel like when you're looking at the future, like, look, you're good with guys like Barton and Medlock, but there is a lot to figure out after those guys. And I think that's where Reed could eventually fit in. And I said he's an outside linebacker, but I feel like he's a guy who could play inside, outside more too. He is an explosive edge rushing guy. And look, the future of the defensive end position, Utah is always going to have defensive linemen coming in and doing things for them too. So that's where he could benefit for them off the edge. But I mean, franchise outside linebacker, as I mentioned, I think this is a guy who could play off the ball too, really, Dante.
Yeah, I wouldn't doubt it at all. I mean, you just look at that speed and overall, the coaching staff that Utah has. Colton Swan's one of the best linebacker
Mhm.
coaches in the entire nation. You saw what he did with a two-star safety recruit and Devin Lloyd made him a first-round draft
Great
pick.
point.
So, I mean, having any doubts with this coaching staff, especially Colton Swan, is an extremely far-fetched thing to have because I mean, every player that steps into this program just explodes pretty much. Any player that gets quality playing time over the course of a couple seasons is going to have an NFL career or some sort of NFL opportunity. That's what we've seen, especially with the defensive side of the ball over the past few years. So I mean, you look at a player like Reed and his speed and his overall just bend and overall intangibles. I think that he could succeed as a linebacker for sure under Colton Swan.
Yeah, I definitely think so as well. And now the kind of the next biggest thing is Utah going to be able to land Reed? And I think they'll definitely have a chance, right? When you look at the position that the Utah football program, the Baylor football program, the Oklahoma State football program, and Utah coming off back-to-back conference championships, I think isn't the best. But I mean, Oklahoma and Baylor, Oklahoma State and Baylor, those are no slouches. I mean, Oklahoma, I almost call them the Sooners. Geez, if we had any Oklahoma State fans listening, they would get pretty offended by that. But Oklahoma State, when you're talking about them, what Coach Gundy and this team have done, they're always around the top 20. They kind of taper off towards the end of the season. Usually it seems like they just always have that loss or two, but they're a team that's always been capable, battled for some Big 12 championships, of course, too. So I think that makes a lot of sense. But look, if I had to say where I would guess Reed is going to end up at, I feel like it's probably going to be Baylor. He plays high school football in Texas. He's very close to Baylor. And every guy's different, right? Some guys like to get away from home, go somewhere, make their own opportunity. And also the other thing with these guys is they're going to go where the best opportunity is. I don't think Reed, unless he's a lifelong Baylor fan, is like, if he was a lifelong Baylor fan, he probably would have committed to Baylor like already without even naming a top three. But if I had to project, as I said, just being so close to Baylor, being close to home is a thing that's a lot of appealing for guys still. I feel like he's going to end up at Baylor, but because of Coach Swan, because of we mentioned like what he's done with the guys like Devin Lloyd and the success this Utah team has had, and once again, Justin Medlock, Lander Bart, I think we're just going to continue to see linebackers rise up too, and maybe too with if he does, they see him more of as an edge guy. You look at what Logan Fano I think is going to transform into guys like Kennedy could be in for a huge season. Jonah Ellis. I think there's a lot of reason to appeal with the Utah still, but it feels like Reed's probably going to end up at Baylor. Would you agree, Dante?
Yeah, these position groups on the current roster for Utah are pretty loaded with guys for right
Mhm.
now and the
Yeah, the
future.
short
So I
term for
mean,
sure.
definitely a tough commitment to commit to Utah right now, just because of how loaded every position is and how much depth there is with young players and guys coming in via the transfer portal. So I mean, going to Baylor would probably not. I don't know if it would be in his best interest because I mean nobody really knows at that point. But I mean, given how close it is to home,
Mhm.
and I mean playing for Baylor, playing for Dave Aranda is one of the best things
Yes.
you could do for yourself because I mean that defense is extremely NFL minded. They mix up coverages. They do a lot of really interesting things, and we're going to be able to see that this season when Utah
Yes.
plays Baylor. But regardless of that, I mean Baylor's like I said, very NFL kind of structured program, especially for defenders, because like I said, they disguise a lot of stuff. Their looks are very, very interesting. So I mean, and then obviously they probably don't have the amount of depth that Utah has. You look at their past recruiting classes compared to Utah's. I'd imagine that Utah's are a bit better just because of how Utah's been trending over the past couple of years with back-to-back conference championships, 4 straight conference championship appearances. Baylor, obviously, very good program. I mean, they won the Big 12 2 years ago. So I
Mhm.
mean, obviously they've built up quite a reputation. But I mean, going close to home and probably a little bit more of a chance to play right away. I'd probably side with you and say he's probably going to go to Baylor. But if he were to go to Utah, welcome him with open arms because heck of a ball player.
Exactly. And hey, still in the top three, so still got a shot. We'll see how it all plays out, and we'll keep an eye on Reed's commitment. But Reed isn't the only linebacker we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about a 4-star linebacker who visited Utah over the weekend in a moment. But first, I want to tell you guys a little bit more about our friends at Bird Dogs. Bird Dogs stretchy khaki shorts are designed to fit slimmer through the thigh and leg, giving you a truly sculpted look. Bird Dog shorts do the exact same thing as Lululemon, but fit way better. They fit way better than regular shorts because those regular shorts are made of a stiff, restricting cotton. Bird Dogs fixed this issue by inventing cloud knit fabric that looks just like khakis, but stretches so you get a way slimmer fit without having to sacrifice movement. Bird Dogs use anti-stink sweat wicking fabric that keeps you cool and dry all day long. Guys, I love wearing my Bird Dogs dogs, whether it's using them to record this podcast, go on a walk, hanging out with friends, going to the movies. You can use your bird dogs for whatever. Even you could use them to go on a date. There's lots of things you can do with your bird dogs. And now you get your own pair of bird dogs. Just go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege for a free Yeti style tumbler with your order. That's birddogs.com/lockedoncollege for a free Yeti style tumbler. You won't want to take your bird dogs off. We promise you. So once again, go to birddogs.com/lockedoncollege for a free Yeti style tumbler with your order. Also, don't miss don't miss Locked On's NBA Draft Live on Thursday night. Pick by pick analysis from our stable of local NBA hosts, national reaction from our NBA big board hosts, and live check-ins from inside the NBA draft. Locked On NBA Draft Live starting at 7:30 p.m. Eastern Time on the Locked On NBA YouTube page. So make sure you guys check out our coverage of the NBA draft. Not a lot of suspense around the first pick, obviously, but the rest of the draft figures to be exciting. And speaking of excitement, let's talk a little bit about Xavier Debo, as his nickname is, Atkins. So when we talk about Xavier Atkins, he's a 4-star linebacker at the class of 2024. He's committed to LSU. He's from the Louisiana area as well. So this is going to be a tough one to get him to decommit. But once again, we talked about fit is important, and there's enough of an interest to take a visit out to Utah, which I definitely think says something. So we've seen guys this happen before, right? There's a lot of Utah and BYU guys where they'll go and serve on their mission. When they come back, they end up at one of the other schools. That's something that does happen. Guys flip their commitments all the time. And with Atkins too, it's not like he's signed his letter of intent yet. So there's still an opportunity here for Utah. And I'm a big fan of Atkins. Look, he's a really explosive athlete too. This is another guy, not in the terms of like what we just talked about with a Reed in terms of explosiveness off the edge, but he's a guy, man, he just sees that ball and he flies to it. I mean, he's got 4.4 speed, 6'1", 200. And, some guys say 4.4 speed and you're like, is he really 4.4? No, this guy's got 4.4 speed. He absolutely flies the ball like a heat-seeking missile, shoots through gaps, can drag down some of the biggest backs. Also really processes stuff quickly. He can really find where the ball's going, sniff out run fakes. Really good in coverage too, can pick off passes, plays the ball well in the air. That speed can chase running backs down, beat them to the sideline too. Offensive linemen have a really hard time getting their hands on him too. So, with Atkins, like I said, 6'1", 200, maybe you want to add a little bit more strength at that position, but I think he's a guy, especially long-term. There's a reason he's a 4-star. You don't find linebackers with this type of speed often. And if Utah could get him to flip from LSU, this would be just a big get, Dante.
Yeah, I had a very similar scouting report to you as well. Shows a lot of patience as a run defender, but very quick to act. He'll hang out around the line of scrimmage, and as soon as he sees any sort of opening, he'll just fly through that gap and hit the running back, hit whoever the ball carrier is pretty dang hard. That 4.4 speed is obviously the biggest thing about his game, and like you were saying, just flocks to the ball. There were a couple reps that he had at wide receiver actually, where it was like he was running a go route, and then as soon as the ball was in the air and it was hanging up there, like he'd gain so much separation in like the blink of an eye, and eventually just break away from whoever the DB was. That speed really sticks out. The physicality really sticks out. And I mean, like you were saying, 6 foot, 215 is what 24/7 has him listed at. Even with that, like there's still so much time to grow in between now and when he gets to Utah. Class of 24 players, he can add another 5-10 pounds if he wanted to before he got to Utah, before getting on a real college diet, before getting in the weight room every single day up on the hill. So I mean, and the other thing about him is that he's a very willing tackler. Like a lot of players with these great intangibles, you'll see it on film, not really super willing. This kid is willing to lay his body on the line and do whatever it takes for his team. The sideline to sideline speed really sticks out as well. So, I mean, overall, the athleticism is fantastic, but also the swagger that he plays with, the confidence that he plays with, the IQ that he plays with, showing patience at the line of scrimmage, and then just shooting gaps at will whenever he has the opportunity to in the blink of an eye. So this would be an incredible get for Utah. I'd be extremely stoked to see Xavier Atkins play for the Utes, especially given when he would be coming in, that would probably be towards the end of Lander Barton's tenure, towards the end of Kylan Reed's tenure. Players like that who are going to be phasing out and being able to fill those voids very quickly with a player who runs a 4.4 at the linebacker position would be, I mean, one of the best things for this program going forward.
It absolutely would be. And as you mentioned, just because it's when some of those guys would be getting phased out, kind of right, a Lander, maybe if he's leaving for the draft, or maybe a Medlock is a huge year and even he's heading off, or even if Medlock's like, I'll stay 2 more, you need guys beside him. And I think that's where Atkins would fit in. There's a really clear path for Atkins to play early on. I think just with the level he's at, the speed and everything. Look, got to add a little bit of the strength, but talked about it a few times on this show, just like the physical transformation these guys can make from when like their high school season end to the start of the following season. I mean, Spencer Fano already looked completely different from the last time I saw him on a high school field. I felt like to when I saw him in spring camp. So or spring ball. I just feel like That's what these guys are capable of doing, is making those transformations. The appealing thing for, especially, and I don't know what LSU's linebacker situation is like, but Atkins really could have a chance to play early, to your point, Dante. So is Utah going to be able to get him? Look, I mean, they don't do FanDuel and betting odds on where these guys are going to commit because they're high schoolers. I would not bet on him flipping from LSU just because he's from Louisiana, but I'm also not going to say, oh, there's no way, because like I mentioned, and as we've been talking about this whole thing, you and I have highlighted Colton Swan, the opportunity to be part of a winning Utah program that's in a right point as well. Also, Dante, I don't got a problem saying I'd much rather play for Kyle Whittingham than Brian Kelly as well.
Most definitely. I mean, without a doubt. Brian Kelly, there's so many stories over the years of him just not being the type of guy that you'd want to play for. And I mean, it's endless. It goes back to his time at Central Michigan, goes to his time at Notre Dame. And I mean, you even see the TikToks now of him at LSU. Like the dude is, I mean, he's a cornball, to put it lightly. He's a total cornball. Kyle Whittingham's obviously no nonsense. Pretty much the exact opposite. You know, he's not going to make a fool out of himself. He's going to put his head down, get to work, and get Utah to achieve their goals, which they've done very easily over the past few years. So, I mean, if he wants to come play for a team that is going to take their players to a conference championship year in and year out, make sure they have their head on their shoulders the right way and get them to the NFL, then I mean, Utah should be the no-brainer. But then the thing also to consider is that he hasn't even taken his official to LSU yet, which is very interesting because given he's already committed, it shows a lot of loyalty, and he hasn't even taken his official visit there yet. Obviously, he's been there a handful of times because he's obviously committed there, but that official visit, I think, when he gets that locked in, I mean, it might just solidify him going to LSU, but it also could just be the exact opposite. It could solidify him going elsewhere. And he's already taken visits to Arkansas, TCU, UCF, as well as Utah. So, I mean, there are a lot of different teams within this fight. And you look at TCU stole a couple of recruits from Utah this past cycle. A lot of it because of their success this past season. You know, they went to the college football playoff. Obviously, they almost won the Big 12. So I mean, they've been showing some really good strides, and that's with a first-year head coach in Sonny Dykes. So I mean, you'd have to figure that program is really just trending upwards at the moment in time, which is going to be a hard team to fight off. Arkansas as well. I mean, an SEC team, maybe not the caliber of an LSU, but I mean, I love Sam Pittman. He's really instilled a great culture in Arkansas. So I think that wouldn't be a bad landing spot either. And then UCF obviously making that jump to the Power Five. Going to have some sort of swing now with that. Obviously, the recruiting is just going to get better. I don't know how much better it's going to get, but it's going to get better when you're recruiting from a Power Five standpoint rather than a Group of Five standpoint. And UCF has a pretty good track record in the Group of Five and as of late. And they could probably use like an example such as Utah, who made the jump to Power Five and is succeeding at a high level. They could say, look at where Utah is. That's our goal. That's where we're trying to be. And I mean, that could be a big pull. And I mean, that Florida weather might be a little bit of a turnoff, but I mean, you never know. And especially with these kids, staying close to home might be a big thing. And obviously Florida's a lot closer to home than a Utah is. So going to be a tough one to beat out all these other schools, especially with so many players, but would be more than happy to have him at Utah because that 4.45 speed really, really sticks out on tape.
Yeah, and Atkins wasn't the only guy to visit Utah this past weekend either, as Rustin Young, a three-star offensive lineman from Hawaii, 6'5", 256, also visited Utah. And the biggest thing with Young, he's actually, from what I could find, and I think Dante was the same way, I couldn't find his like huddle video or his game film itself, but you can see posts. He has a lot of, first of all, he's got a ton of interest from schools and social media. I think a large reason is that 6'5", 256 frame. And he's also posted clips of himself at the different various camps that kind of go on throughout the offseason. You can kind of see he's got really good feet and pass protection, can easily slide to cut off pass rushers inside or outside, long arms to keep him at bay as well, good initial punch too, plays with a good base, doesn't overextend himself. And look, with that frame, as I mentioned, I think he's really got the strength to grow into an elite run blocker too, and just an elite offensive lineman, whether it's a guard or tackle at the college level. So I would love to see Jim Harding be able to work with Young, because I think together that could be a really good marriage for Utah and Young as it relates to his football future as well.
Yeah, I'd love to see Jim Harding work with a plethora of high school offensive linemen, especially one that has a 6'5", 250-pound frame with room to grow. So, I mean, Jim Harding, one of the best in the business. He's been at Utah for so many years now. His stint at offensive coordinator wasn't as good as his stint has been as the offensive line coach, but I mean, he's never really let Utah down, especially like during those seasons, during the early parts of the season where it's like the offensive line looks like a bit of a question mark. He always seems to have it figured out by week 8 or 9 and have Utah, I mean, just ready to play for the second half of the season when they've made a splash, just having big wins against Oregon twice in 21, against USC twice in 22. He's been a vital part of that. And it's a lot of just because of how well he develops these offensive linemen and how how well he has them mature and just overall take in the game and realize that, I mean, it's a marathon, not necessarily a sprint in college football. The season's long. Sure, there's only 12 games, but the season is long. It's fatiguing. It'll take a toll on you. And I mean, Jim Harding does an extremely good job maturing his players and getting them ready to play week in and week out. And when you see players with such an enticing frame, such as Rustin Young, it just adds a lot of excitement to an already exciting offensive line room. And I mean, just having players for the future is obviously extremely important.
You mentioned it's a marathon, not a sprint. And I think that applies for recruiting as well, and especially players' development, because I look at guys like Spencer Fano. I would be shocked if Spencer Fano saw the field other than garbage time this season because it takes time for offensive linemen to grow and mature. Now, I'm sure there will be some people, not most of you listening to this, but someone out there is going to tweet out, man, Fano's such a disappointment. Think about how Clark Phillips played right away. Two completely different positions. Corners have a lot more success playing on early. I think we all remember Derek Stingley making plays for LSU in the national championship and what he was able to do. Offensive linemen and defensive linemen always takes longer. They have to put on the strength to get up to the physicality of that level versus corner. If you're fast, you're fast. You're going to be able to see the field if you play your technique right and do all that well. It's still hard to play in your first year, but it's much more common at corner than it is on the offensive line and defensive line. So that's the thing to mention with all these guys is it takes time in the process, but we've seen it work with so many guys before where they bide their time and they get their opportunity. Sometimes it comes at another position. Dante, I think of Jaquindon Jackson, who just had to wait, then makes a swap, and then boom, he's one of the best running backs in the Pac-12 now, and I think he's going to have a chance to be one of the best running backs in the nation. That's how I am on Jaquindon Jackson, especially. So I just think that's important to remember too, because we do look in the world of social media, instant gratification. We want to see these guys on the field. We want to see them do their thing right away, but it's important to remember it takes time. And it's just these recruits are a little more heralded, like who they are, rather than to tie this all the way back to a Devin Lloyd. No one really cared when Devin Lloyd came into this program if he turned out or not. It was kind of a low risk, high reward, as we talked about. He was able to turn that in. So I just feel like that's important to bear in mind, because I think a lot of these guys, even if they don't play right away, given time, they could become special players here up at Utah.
Yeah, I remember when Manny Bowen decided to leave the
Mhm.
program, and that was what really just gave Devin Lloyd his opportunity. And I didn't really know a whole lot about Devin Lloyd, but somebody just posted like a tweet of him, and I was like, "This is the guy!" Like he was
Mhm.
built and long, obviously those long arms too. And it was like, and he's a sophomore. It's like just give it 2 years, and he's going to be a stud. And we saw that early on. I mean, he was pretty good in 2019, but then obviously the years following just took it to a completely different level. So I mean, recruiting's very odd, and you look at the
Mhm.
teams that Utah is going to be competing against for Rustin Young. It's Oregon State and Hawaii. I think he's taken visits to both of those schools. You look at Oregon State; that's going to be a tough team to beat, especially for an offensive line prospect. Because if you look at the production that they've had on the field from their
Mhm.
offensive line just these last 2 years, I mean, if I'm a high school offensive line prospect and you see an instant opportunity to play for Oregon State, like I,
Yeah.
I would honestly jump on that. You look at their tackles last season; both of their tackles combined didn't allow a single sack last season. They're starting tackles. Like these guys just put out absolute monsters on the field. And I mean, they're returning like all their guys this year too. So I mean, you get a year to play under those players and go from there. I mean, Oregon State's offensive line is pretty much turning into an offensive line factory over these past couple of seasons, just because their production has been ridiculous. Yet they're still not getting these high profile players. So players could just step in there and get instant playing time, and then just eventually follow the same path that a lot of these current offensive linemen they have who are going to be NFL players. Like it wouldn't shock me in the slightest if all five of their offensive linemen this year
Mhm.
were all Pac-12 third team, second team,
Yeah.
first team, kind of just pick your poison because they're all going to be up there. Like they return almost everyone. They're extremely loaded at that position. So I mean, that's going to be a tough team to beat. But I think Utah definitely can beat out Oregon State for a
Mhm.
prospect, just given Utah's recent success. And I mean, they beat Oregon State last year by 20 plus. And I mean, Utah's been the premier program in the Pac-12 over the past 4 years. Honestly, they haven't missed a single conference championship game, excluding the 2020 COVID season. Which also, to your point about like the Clark Phillips thing, Utah didn't really have much to lose by starting him in 2020 because the season, like it really didn't count. Like honestly, nobody's going to come back and be like, "Oh, remember that 2020
Yeah.
season when like this my team's better than yours because we beat you in
Mhm.
2020." Like nobody's making that point because the season was pretty much all scrimmage games. So Utah didn't really have anything necessarily to lose by starting Clark Phillips because those games simply just weren't as competitive as they are now. Whereas starting a player like Fano early on when you already have some pretty decent offensive linemen on the team, it would be a big ask.
No, it absolutely would. And going back to Young too, you did a good job just highlighting the other schools and the option he has like that. I actually feel probably of the group we've talked about so far, I feel best about Young's chances to come to Utah just because as we mentioned, the relationship being so close to a Baylor, being so close with as we talked about with Atkins to LSU. But the difference with Young to me is, and I know he's close to Hawaii, but obviously Hawaii and Utah are just on different levels of a football program. That's where I feel like Utah could have the edge. But and as you mentioned with that Oregon State offensive line, they make a really competitive pitch, I'm sure, as well. So it's going to be interesting to see how this recruiting and the rest of the recruiting cycle turns out. And if you guys want more recruiting, you can check out Dante Guardi's work at Utah. Also give him a follow at Dante Guardi on Twitter. And make sure to check out all the stuff he has going on over there. Dante, appreciate you joining us.
Of course, JT. Thank you.
That's going to do it for today's edition of Locked On Utes, but we'll be back tomorrow talking more things Utah football.